back to another video of Mike's Geek Corner with your host, Mike Quevedo. In this video, I'm going to review the 1981 Spider-Man animated series, which ran from September 1981 to March 1982 in syndication. It had reruns in the mid and late 80s. This and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends were the first projects of Marvel Productions, which succeeded the Patty Freeling Enterprises. This show is, in my mind, probably the second best Spidey show after Spectacular Spider-Man, if not slightly my number one favorite Spidey show. Prior to this show, Spidey had already made his animated mark on TV screens. First on ABC in the first Spider-Man animated series that ran 3 seasons from 1967 to 1970, with the theme song becoming an everlasting staple in Spidey's cultural pantheon. The first season was produced by Steve Krantz and Canadian outlet Grant Ray Lawrence, who had already charted familiar waters with Marvel Superheroes animated show in syndication. Grant Ray Lawrence had a comparatively better budget on Spider-Man than they did on Marvel Superheroes as far as providing better animation that was somewhat on par with the relatively more fluid efforts of Filmation and Hanna-Barbera, as opposed to the over-sheepness of something like Space Angel. In the first season, we see Spidey tangling with his rogues gallery from the comics in what are visually faithful but more simplified adventures in the vein of Birdman and the New Adventures of Superman, discarding the more deathful elements from the comics, such as Peter Parker's alter ego conflicting with his social life, not to mention not touching his origin. However, after Grant Ray Lawrence went into bankruptcy, production for the following seasons of the series was handed to former Terry Toons animator and feature animated film maverick, Ralph Bakshi. Bakshi did bring a little more of the angsty elements from Peter's social life, including his dynamic origin. Unfortunately, being handed a significantly lower budget than the first season not only meant that Bakshi, being basically a one-man unit in the series, had to dramatically stress the use of stock footage from the first season and the show Rocket Robin Hood, along with less inspired designs, but also, with the exception of a 2-time appearance from the Kingpin and one from a plainclothes green skin bespectacled Mysterio, he had to do away with Spidey's comic villains, replacing them with mostly generic-looking foes, and many of the adventures put our hero in very outlandish settings that have very little to do with Spider-Man's essence as a character. Within the 1970s, Spider-Man made his first 3 live-action TV appearances. First in the Electro Company recurrent skit, Spidey Super Stories, where a friendly neighborhood hero, who communicated with word balloons instead of speaking out loud, dealt mostly with petty criminal activity. Then the Amazing Spider-Man series on CBS, starring former child actor Nicholas Hammond in the title role, with his Peter Parker already being a university student prior to his radioactive spider incident, and taking on plainclothes criminals and no comic book supervillains, and then in a loose Japanese counterpart TV show from Toei. The web-slinger made his return to what at the time seemed to be his more comfortable medium outside of comics, which was animation, guest starring in 2 episodes in the Patty Freeling Spider-Woman animated series in 1979. After Spider-Woman wrapped after only 1 season in April of 1980, the Patty Freeling was bought by the newly formed Marvel Productions in 1981, a company which David the Patty himself became president of, and Stan Lee became vice president, overlooking creative affairs. The company's primary aim was to produce animated material based on the characters of its main company, hence not needing to sell the rights to the characters. Around this time, NBC was looking to compete with the hugely popular animated DC superhero ensemble show, The Super Friends, airing on NBC. Marvel Productions ultimately delivered to NBC what it wanted in the form of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. This series showcased Peter Parker and fellow housemates Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, and Angelica Jones, aka Firestar, teaming up in their superhero identities to fight such fiends as Doctor Doom, Loki, Magneto, Juggernaut, Electro, Videoman, and Dracula, with occasional extra help from other Marvel stars such as Thor, Captain America, Doctor Strange, the X-Men, the Hulk, and the Black Knight, while also dealing with everyday challenges that come with them being university students and making ends meet financially. It's a well-written, fun show with some solid character development. Still, as a Spider-Man series, much like the previous iterations, it doesn't fully capture the spirit of the character. With 2 constant companions aiding him, the dramatic angle of a misunderstood hero, so prevalent in the Spidey comics, is significantly diminished. Not to mention how having a secret laboratory with a supercomputer for crime activities neutralizes sympathy for Peter as an everyday middle-class citizen. Fortunately, it would seem that Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was actually an afterthought for Marvel Productions, of a solo Spider-Man animated project that had gone into production prior to Amazing Friends. After NBC rejected the solo Spidey series in favor of the seemingly more commercially viable Amazing Friends, the solo Spidey went to be aired in syndication. Both shows, which shared the same creative unit, premiered on September 12 of 1981. Coming off stints in shows like Shazam and Dynamite, Writer Donald Glut, along with several other writers, bring the ripe experience to make justice to the Spider-Man comics in episodes that capture Peter Parker's struggles while helping maintain his Aunt May and himself economically afloat as he works as a photographer for the Daily Bugle, while he also attends college, attempts at a relationship with Bugle colleague Betty Brant, withstands constant pressure from his hot-headed boss J. Jonah Jameson, and not least important, swing around the Big Apple in the sometimes thankless role of Spider-Man, looking out for the well-being of fellow New Yorkers, and everyone in need of rescue from such threats as Doctor Doom, Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, the Vulture, the Lizard, and Magneto. We also have some original villains like the Stuntman, the Sidewinder, the Gadgeteer, Nephilia, and Professor Gizmo. While it may not have the profound drama that the later Spider-Man animated shows did, Spider-Man 1981 captured enough humor and engrossing narrative to arguably make it the most compelling rendition of a Marvel property in animation up to that point. More fluid animation was also provided for the series and Amazing Friends than any of the previous Marvel projects. As this was still a Saturday morning fare that had to abide with the regulations of the FCC of that particular period, Spidey does not engage in punching or kicking another character. Still, what the writers do bring to the show is a very well balanced approach that acknowledges the comics and also seem to carry effectively gimmicks from their previous animated work. More on this in a little bit. The boys' work is well put together. Ted Schwartz provides the appropriate witty humor and sarcasm of Spidey, as well as the meekness of Peter. William Woodson gives J. Jonah Jameson pomposity and grumpiness with a measure of dry humor. Morgan Lofting inserts motherly warmth as May Parker. For Peter's sympathetic co-worker and sometime love interest Betty Brant, we have Mona Marshall. And for Daily Bugle's editor-in-chief and voice of reason to Jameson, Robbie Robertson, we have Lee Bailey. Late British film composer Johnny Douglas provides the series with a musical score that effectively emotes touches of thrilling heroic adventure, including a nifty theme, foreboding atmosphere, suspenseful mystery, and comedic relief. These musical pieces were also used in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Among the things I greatly appreciate about this show are the character designs by Rick Hoberg. They all look like John Romero's drawings come to life. I especially appreciate the look for Peter Parker, as it was more based on the look of his newspaper strip counterpart, with a more wavy hairstyle with sideburns as opposed to the more 60s crew-cut-like hair. Same with doing away with a conservative suit and tie and instead sporting blue striped linen pants, a turtleneck to smartly hide his Spidey outfit underneath, and an open collar shirt. Speaking of Spidey's outfit, here his mask is attached to the back of his neck, just like Batman's hood. Now I'll talk about a number of episodes that I hope will further showcase why I think this show is vintage. In the first story arc published in the newspaper strip, J. Jonah Jameson pressures the UN through his editorial to invite Dr. Doom to address an anti-terrorism conference, seeing how Doom rid all Latveria of crime. This concept has parallels to 6 episodes in the animated show that form a storyline that involves schemes by Dr. Doom, superbly voiced by Ralph James, to gain the title of Master of the World from the UN, with Jameson convinced that he's a benevolent leader, although while in Latveria, a rebellious movement to overthrow the ironclad tyrant is taking place. In the 4th episode of this arc, Canon of Doom, we are also treated to a flashback of Doom's origin, much like in Fantastic Four Annual Number 2, where we see Victor Von Doom in Latveria as a boy with his father, a gypsy healer, fleeing from the tyrannical Baron and then vowing vengeance against all mankind after his father dies from the cold weather, hiding his son and himself from the Baron's forces. We also see Reed Richards make an appearance shortly before and after Von Doom has his accident that disfigures him. This version of Dr. Doom was the most layered take on the character at that time on TV. Because of this cartoon, for some time I thought Dr. Doom was primarily a Spider-Man villain. It wasn't until some years later that I realized he's the main nemesis of the Fantastic Four. In the series' first episode, Bubble Bubble, Oil and Trouble, we find Dr. Octopus burglarizing precious artifacts for the purpose of enhancing the power of his tentacles for his ultimate goal of stealing all the oil from the tankers in New York Harbor and holding it for ransom. While Spider-Man is attempting to thwart Doc Ock's plans. As Peter Parker, he also has to complete an assignment for a college class, which his pursuit of Doc Ock is costing him more time in completing. Part of the synopsis is reminiscent to that of Amazing Spider-Man number 88, where Peter, after achieving a strenuous endeavor as Spidey in helping people evacuate a building before collapsing, arrives home with the intent to finish his school studies, but falls asleep and it affects his grades. The episode also shares some traits with Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man Annual Number 1, as Doc Ock is trying to capture a specially designed military sub. In an episode of Dynamite, a show Don Glut previously worked on, a supervillain also plots to steal the city's oil and keep it for ransom. In Lizards Everywhere, after pulling a gimmick that facilitates him the stealing of all the reptiles in Central Park Zoo and keep them in a hidden breeding ground, the Lizard plots to overtake New York by using a weather control machine that will turn the Big Apple into a tropical jungle and unleash his legion of reptiles. Spidey must not only deal with this grave dilemma, but also an inconvenient cold. This is a plot that basically goes back to the lizard's first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man number 6, where the reptilian foe intends on dosing other lizards and swamp creatures like crocodiles and alligators with the same serum that turned him from Kurt Connors to the lizard, so to make them even more powerful, just like him, in order to rule the planet. 2 years after her introduction in Amazing Spider-Man number 194, the Black Cat makes her jump to animation in the episode Curiosity Killed the Spider-Man, where, after Spidey thwarts the lascivious thief's attempt to run away with stolen jewelry from attendees at a New Year's party, and then also intercepts her attempt at stealing the precious Maltese Mouse artifact at a cargo ship, our hero is offered a job to protect the Maltese Mouse at the Johnny Griffin show, where he must not only protect the artifact from the Black Cat, but also, as Peter, try and spend some time with Betty Brant as spectators in the show, after he already stood her up while contending with the feline femme fatale. Previously, in Amazing Spider-Man numbers 204 and 205, Spidey also engages in protecting a rare display at a museum from the Black Cat, although while Peter is developing a relationship with a fellow student. Also be on the lookout on this episode for a presumed cameo from a certain bespectacled, mild-mannered reporter. In The Sandman is Coming, Peter and ECU Science Committee Sally Ann Beaumont are invited by NASA to witness the arrival of a space probe from Mars that contains collected fragments of radioactive soil at an island on the beach, where, after the probe lands, the Sandman rises from the sands and steals the samples. After Peter assumes his Spider-Man identity and tries to stop the Sandman, the former loses his mask in the struggle and is forced to retreat, so to not expose his real identity. This gives the Sandman the opportunity to absorb the Martian substance, which in turn augments his powers. But this is only one of the dilemmas Spidey has to confront. Not only is halting Sandman's crime spree a must, but Peter must tend to finding a solution to a possible dismissal from college, after Sally accused him of negligence as he was not present during the confrontation with the Sandman at the island, not to mention having left his closet door open at his room, leaving his Spidey suit to open view if Aunt May were to enter the room. Spider-Man loosening his mask in battle with the Sandman goes back to the villain's first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man number 4, as Spidey and Sandman duke it out on top of a skyscraper and the web-slinger ends up getting his mask torn in the process, which causes him to flee the fight, to avoid revealing his face, and also, as he's making another mask, has to act fast as his Aunt May is nearing his room and might see him in his Spidey attire. It's party time in the Pied Piper of New York town, which has Spider-Man being invited to a disco nightclub by the nefarious illusionist Mysterio, where Spidey, after arriving, finds out that Mysterio is hypnotizing the numerous guests by the disco music and then orders them to strike at Spider-Man. And after Spidey retreats from the scene, the following day, Mysterio's music falls on the ears of all of ESU's occupants, except Peter's, as his spider powers make him immune to the sound. Pretending to be hypnotized, Peter follows the entranced crowd all the way to the First City Bank, where, after changing into Spidey, he confronts a malefic magician. However, this time Mysterio uses another tune that does enchant our neighborhood web-slinger, and then has Spidey locked inside the bank's vault. Spider-Man must find a way out of the vault, as Mysterio now has his mindless slaves, stealing a nuclear missile. A year prior to this show, in issue number 46 of Spidey Super Stories, Mysterio conducts a dance contest to select a winner for a Disco Monster movie financed by stolen bank money. Also, in the Spider-Woman show, in which show co-writer Jeffrey Scott had previously worked on, there was an episode in which the demonic being Dormammu orders his followers to seize control of a satellite launch by hypnotizing the staff of the launch in order to halt the moon, as a total eclipse will cover the Earth in eternal darkness, with only Spider-Woman remaining unaffected by the hypnosis due to her arachnid powers. The circus is in town in Carnival of Crime, and after Peter, his Aunt May, and Betty Brant attend the carnival, Peter's spider sense lead him to the closed circus tent and discovers that the Ringmaster is the one who has framed Spider-Man for the 3 recent robberies by using a hypnotic gas and his acrobatic goons to fool people into thinking Spidey committed the burglaries. After Peter turns into Spider-Man, the Ringmaster keeps him busy as he releases all the caged animals onto the panicked crowd, while the villain circus performers set forth to robbing the First Federal Bank and once again framing the web-slinger, who must retrieve the stolen gold and clear his name. This episode very much captures the spirit of Amazing Spider-Man number 16, as far as involving a scheme from the Ringmaster to use Spidey as a device for his criminal endeavor. In issue number 76 of Marvel 2-in-1, the Ringmaster had also used a tactic of releasing the circus animals for panicking the public in order to cover their escape from Iceman and the Thing. There's also an Easter egg of posters of the X-Men as featured attractions at the carnival, much like in X-Men number 111. Revenge of the Green Goblin shows us industrialist Norman Osborn, after having escaped from a mental institution, traveling in a train that ultimately crashes, with the impact throwing Osborn away from the wreckage and restoring the memory of his Green Goblin persona, who had previously learned that Spider-Man and Peter Parker are one and the same before the impact of an explosion during a battle with Spidey had knocked him out and made the Goblin personality disappear until now. As the Green Goblin seeks revenge on Spider-Man for having captured him, and on J. Jonah Jameson for having previously published a story detailing questionable methods at Osborn Industries, our friendly neighborhood web-slinger must find a way to stop the vengeful villain and not jeopardize his secret identity. Events that occurred in issues of Amazing Spider-Man numbers 14, 39, and 40 are showcased in this episode. There's also an echo of Amazing Spider-Man number 27, as far as Spidey being in danger of being unmasked and exposed by the Goblin. Neil Ross, who voices the Green Goblin, would go on to reprise the role in the 90s Spider-Man animated series. It's a jungle in the episode The Hunter and the Hunted, as J. Jonah Jameson, used as a mascot for the Daily Bugle, hires Kraven the Hunter to go to the prehistoric Savage Land and capture the last known living saber-toothed tiger, Sabu, the constant companion to the legendary jungle lord Ka-Zar. After Kraven tactically traps Sabu and takes the tiger with him back to New York, Ka-Zar ultimately boards a plane and follows to the Big Apple, where his search for Sabu leads him to an encounter with Spider-Man. While their meeting is confrontational at first, an understanding is eventually reached. However, as Ka-Zar spots a Daily Bugle truck with Sabu's image, he abruptly leaves Spidey to chase the vehicle leading to Jameson at the Bugle. And after the Jungle Lord demands the return of Sabu, Jameson leads him to Kraven's lair, where he is set for a trap. And it's up to our favorite web spinner to rescue Ka-Zar, Sabu, Jameson, and his nephew Mortimer. In the first two issues of Astonishing Tales in 1970, Kraven is determined to capture Sabu, as he is the only beast of his kind to walk the earth in a million years. And so Kraven and his henchmen travel to the Savage Land and manage to outmatch Ka-Zar and Sabu, and capture the latter and take him back to New York, with Ka-Zar tracking them to rescue the saber-toothed tiger. One of the show's writers, Jack Hanrahan, had written an episode of the 1967 series Birdman where a villain named Hannibal the Hunter intends to lure Birdman into a trap by using a friend of his as bait. In the episode The Capture of Captain America, which is animated by Toei Animation, Jonah Jameson, being a big fan of Captain America, arranges a festival in dedication to the Sentinel of Liberty. This announcement reaches Cap's most notorious nemesis, the Red Skull, chillingly voiced by a pre-Optimus Prime Peter Cullen, who infiltrates the dedication ceremony where, despite Spider-Man's attempt at aiding Cap, the Scorch of the Master Race ultimately puts the celebrated hero out of commission after dispensing a knockout gas which in turn causes the living legend to badly execute a maneuver that ends up putting Spidey at a disadvantage. After the Red Skull boards his aircraft with the unconscious Cap, everyone from J. Jonah Jameson, Betty Brant, the crowd, and eventually most of New York blames Spider-Man for Captain America's capture, with Jameson suggesting he's in cahoots with the Red Skull. In order to seize the increasing hostility towards him from the population, Spidey, who had managed to plant his spider tracer onto Cap's shield before they had vanished, decides he has to go and rescue Cap. In order to avoid attention going as himself, the web-slinger goes to Stan's costume shop and rents a Captain America costume, albeit one a little too big for him, and boards a flight to Germany where the Red Skull's castle stands, and try to reach in time before the Skull can use his mind transference machine to switch bodies with Captain America. Back in 1968, with the Amazing Spider-Man King-Size Special number 5, Peter Parker travels abroad to uncover the truth about his parents, and ends up beating the Red Skull, who, just like in this episode, is assisted by giant knight robots. Also, in the issue number 220 of Captain America and the Falcon from 1978, written by Don Glut, Cap is also captured and is put in the lab of criminal scientist Lyle Decker so to transfer Cap's power to Decker's body. In the episode Arsenic and Aunt May, after Spider-Man assists in the capture of a cat burglar, once put behind bars, the burglar shares a cell with none other than the criminal master of disguises, the Chameleon, to whom the burglar tells that he is a cousin of the murderer of Ben Parker, Peter Parker's uncle, and how prior to Ben Parker's murder, Spider-Man wasn't yet fighting crime but cashing in on his powers. This also makes the Chameleon think Peter Parker always taking the best photos of Spider-Man. And so, after successfully executing an escape plan from prison disguised as the Warden, the Chameleon and his assistant Colleen formulate a strategy that involves disguising a psychic medium mentor, as well as the use of special effects, in order to deceive May Parker to believe her departed husband wishes for her to have Spider-Man be made helpless and then delivered to Mentor, in order for his spirit to truly rest. Mentor gives Aunt May an amulet that, according to him, will help her keep in touch with Ben, but it's actually filled with a hypnotic gas, so she is persuaded to follow the task given. Peter is then asked by her aunt if he can arrange Spidey to meet her at her home, explaining to Peter that maybe Spider-Man isn't that bad after all, seeing how the police department is giving him an award. And so, after he tells Aunt May he's leaving to study at the library, Peter switches to Spider-Man and is then amicably greeted by Aunt May, But then, as Spidey's kept occupied by favors from her, she's attempting various means to incapacitate him. Each attempt more lethal. This isn't the first time the Chameleon tricks someone into serving his dirty deeds. Back in 1974, in Marvel Team-Up number 27, disguised as Rick Jones, the Chameleon convinces the Hulk to break a friend of his free from prison, giving Spidey a very perilous situation to deal with. There's another possible residue from Jack Hanrahan's work in Birdman, as in that show there was a villain with mental abilities called Mentok, which sounds similar to Mentor. Also be on the lookout for a cameo from the Avengers. We fly now over to the episode The Vulture Has Landed, as we find that the Vulture has kidnapped 2 scientists. To get deeper into this mystery, Peter is sent by Jonah Jameson to visit college friend and fellow science whiz Harry Osborn to get a quote from him of the situation at hand. After Spidey finds his civilian clothes gone from a ledge of the Bugle building where he had left them to scout around the city for the Vulture, he swings towards Harry Osborn's penthouse apartment and sneaks in to change into one of Harry's elite clothing. But before Peter has the chance to meet Harry, the Vulture arrives, snatching Harry's papers containing information of his latest experiment, and abducts Peter, mistaking him for Harry. Once the Vulture takes Peter to his airship to join the other kidnapped scientists who are unwittingly working for him, he compels Peter to develop a radar-jamming paint, using Harry's notes, to then apply it to the ship. After Peter finishes painting the ship with the invisible paint, and the Vulture leaves on a scouting mission, Peter takes the opportunity, while out of sight from the captured scientist, to apply invisible paint on himself, and, after momentarily incapacitating Vulture's cyborg birds, which were created by one of the scientists, he dons his Spider-Man attire and manages to help the 2 scientists escape via parachutes. But before he himself can escape, Spidey is cornered by the 3 cybernetic vultures, and shortly after the Vulture returns, the arachnid crime fighter is thrown off the ship without a parachute. If Spidey can somehow survive this fall, he must then figure out the Vulture's purpose for the equipment he acquired. This episode is one that yet again suggests a possible rub-off from Jack Hanrahan, for in an episode of Birdman there's a flying villain called Vulture, who is also clad in a Vulture outfit and has a mechanical bird. Not to mention that it also features scientists whose lives are threatened by Vulture. And if that's not enough, with Don Glut, there's another possible influence from Dynamite, for there's an episode featuring another flying Vulture-clad villain named the Red Vulture, who also has an aircraft in which he carries out his operations, as well as mechanical vultures at his disposal. Blue Falcon and Dynamite also have to find a way out of a perilous situation in the high skies. Now let's take a dive into the episode Wrath of the Submariner, as we witness a Kingpin who, after getting from his scientists a desired highly potent dissolvent fluid which will make him reign over all organized crime, orders to dump the chemical waste into the river, where its pollution reaches and poisons Prince Namor's cousin Namorita. After Namor delivers his cousin to a hospital on the surface world to be treated by Don Blake, Thor's alter ego, he goes on a spree of amok in the city, before Spider-Man ultimately manages to halt his rampage and convinces the Prince of Atlantis to approach this battle against the pollution of the surface world by speaking with influential people. And so, after Namor parts to the Daily Bugle to converse with J. Jonah Jameson, Spidey turns his attention to tailing a limousine which had set off his spider sense before planting a spider tracer in it. The limo leads him to the harbor where he finds crime bosses Silvermane, Hammerhead, Caesar Cicero, and Silvermane's loyal super strong enforcer, Man Mountain Marco, all gather to meet the Kingpin in a yacht. As Spidey is seemingly caught by Marco and then breaks free from his hold, Kingpin uses gas to knock the web-slinger unconscious, and is then bound with chains before thrown overboard to meet his demise below the waters. Can the Submariner approach the area of the Kingpin's yacht in time to rescue Spider-Man, as he has given Jameson a flying tour of the damages on the beach caused by pollution? Also, what is the connection between the Kingpin's dissolvent fluid and the rival mob bosses, and will the fate of the hospitalized Namorita be one that won't encourage the wrath of the Submariner on mankind? This episode very much partly captures the spirit of Amazing Spider-Man number 73, where Silvermane is basically introduced as a rival crime lord to the Kingpin. Speaking of Kingpin, we get to see him here training the way John Romita had him do in the comics, and it's worth pointing out how one of the fighters he trains with, who is called Master of Kung Fu, kind of resembles the way Shang-Chi was drawn back then. And previously in Amazing Spider-Man number 211, we had Namor unleashing his rampage on the surface world for conducting experiments that are jeopardizing Atlantean civilization, which ultimately draws Spidey to confront Namor, and is then weakened by exposure to hot smoke, which then propels Spider-Man to help him, as the episode similarly showcased. Finally, while Mary Jane Watson is absent in the series, another drop-dead gorgeous redhead does appear in the episode Under the Wizard's Spell, as the inhuman prehensile-haired Medusa is invited to New York by her former Frightful Four colleague, the Wizard, who, after she refuses his offer to join him in his schemes, manages to place an unremovable collar on her that will explode if she removes it, in order to force her to help him steal a component to create an anti-gravity weapon. Spider-Man, whom Medusa had helped earlier in a pickle, develops an affection for the Atlantean and vice versa, which is a factor the wizard uses in order to compel Medusa to convince Spidey to help her snatch the final component he needs for his anti-gravity weapon, and then he'd remove the collar. Hence, Medusa feels she has no choice but to deceive Spidey into thinking the component is for stopping the wizard. Once he obtained the component from a military base, the wizard traps the web-slinger in a room with walls that grow increasingly hot, impeding any attempt at climbing and melting webs that make contact with it. As the wizard backs down on his word of removing the collar from Medusa, Spider-Man must find a way out of the infernal hot room and deal with the wizard and his completed weapon. This is the episode where we see Spidey at his most vulnerable as far as how he shows his feelings for Medusa, including his reaction after he finds out she had lied to him to help the wizard. I liken the skeletal for this episode to Amazing Spider-Man number 62, where Medusa visits New York, and after discarding to work with a hairspray corporation, the owner of the business entity tricks Spider-Man into going up against Medusa so to help the Tycoon's campaign. So hopefully this list of episodes will have given you an idea of just how underrated the show is. Sure, it's got its clunkiness that comes from that era, but all in all, its footing is strongly placed within what fans love about Spider-Man comics, and in this particular case, it captured the spirit of the Silver Age and Bronze Age Spidey comics that Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, John Romita, Jerry Conway, Gil Kane, Russ Andrew, Marv Wolfman, Keith Pollard, Chris Claremont, and John Byrne all left their stamp in. It's quintessential Spider-Man, this show. This isn't Spidey and his amazing friends joining Thor to fight Loki, or teaming up with the Black Knight to battle dragons and evil wizards. Love that show, don't get me wrong. It was like a better written pre-galactic Guardian Super Friends. But the solo 81 Spider-Man show is something comparatively more grounded. It has a bit of a Norrish feel, which could be attributed to Don Glut being a fan of old 30s and 40s movie serials like The Adventures of Captain Marvel, Spies Matcher, The Mysterious Dr. Satan, The Masked Marvel, The Spider's Web, Captain America, and Superman. His love for old monster movies seemed to also manifest in episodes like Lizards Everywhere and Web of Nephilia. This is also the guy who gave us the occult files of Dr. Spectre comic, so that can further explain some of the moodiness of the show. I would say it very well balances the lightheartedness of Richard Donner's Superman with the chilling sense of foreboding danger found in something like 1972's The Night Stalker. So, 1981 Spider-Man animated series, nothing short of amazing for Spider fans. It's on Disney Plus, go check it out. I can only hope that in some near future there can be a treatment for a physical media release, but I'm not holding my breath for that. So, that's our review. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you leave your comments below. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll be seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.